Ambassador walked through the grand halls of the Galactic Council building. Her boots made soft sounds on the smooth stone floor. The ceiling rose hundreds of meters above her head, decorated with lights that looked like tiny stars. Everything here was designed to make visitors feel small. Had walked these halls for 15 years, and she still felt that way. She passed delegates from a dozen different species. The tall, blue-skinned looked down at her with their 4 eyes. The insect-like clicked their mandibles as she walked by. A group of warriors stood near a pillar, their scaled bodies covered in ceremonial armor. They watched her with cold, yellow eyes. None of them greeted her. None of them ever did. Reached the human section of the building. It was smaller than the others, tucked away in a corner that received little natural light. This had been humanity's place in the galaxy for 300 years. The quiet corner, the forgotten seat, the species that everyone tolerated but nobody respected. Her assistant, James, waited outside her office. He was young, barely 30, and still believed that hard work could change things. Remembered feeling that way once. "The council session starts in 2 hours, James said. "They have added a new item to the agenda." "Let me guess," said. "Another complaint about our shipping routes." "Worse, they want to reduce our voting rights. They say humanity hasn't contributed enough to galactic security." Stopped walking. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. After 15 years, she thought nothing could surprise her anymore. She was wrong. "Our fleet helped stop the incursion," she said quietly. "We lost 12 ships and 2,000 people. They say we didn't lose enough. The lost 30 ships. They think our low casualties prove we weren't really trying." Laughed. It was not a happy sound. "We lost fewer ships because our tactics were better. We saved lives through skill, and they want to punish us for it." "That's the council," James said. "They've always treated us this way." He was right. From the very first day humanity joined the Galactic Council, the other species had looked down on them. Humans were young. Humans were primitive. Humans had only discovered faster-than-light travel 400 years ago, while most council races had been sailing between stars for thousands of years. They called humans the children. They called them the insects who walk upright. The most powerful military force in the galaxy simply called them the weak ones. And humanity had accepted all of it. Every insult, every unfair trade deal, every restriction on their expansion. They smiled and nodded and said thank you for the opportunity to participate. Walked into her office and sat down at her desk. Through the window she could see the council's central plaza. Thousands of beings moved through it, going about their daily business. Ships flew overhead in endless streams. This station, called Unity Prime, was the heart of galactic civilization. 12 billion souls lived here, representing every species in known space. Humanity had exactly 40,000 residents on the station, less than 0.5%. She pulled up her messages and started reading. Most were routine matters, trade agreements, visa applications, complaints from human merchants who had been cheated by alien business partners. But one message caught her attention. It was from Earth, marked with the highest security clearance. The message was short. It contained only a question: how much longer can we maintain the protocol? Stared at those words for a long time. The protocol, the restraint protocol. It was humanity's greatest secret and heaviest burden. Every human who left Earth knew about it. Every human who worked in the galactic community had sworn to uphold it. But nobody outside of humanity knew it existed. The protocol had one simple rule: never show them what we really are. Thought about the history lessons she had learned as a child. Every human child learned them, even though they were painful. Especially because they were painful. Humanity had almost destroyed itself. Not once, not twice, but over and over again throughout its history. Wars that killed millions. Weapons that could burn entire cities in seconds. Hatred that turned neighbor against neighbor, brother against brother. For thousands of years, humans had practiced the art of killing each other with terrible skill. Then they had reached the stars, and they had discovered something that changed everything. They were not alone. The first alien ship arrived in Earth's solar system in the year 2147. It was an exploration vessel, mapping the edges of known space. They were curious about the little blue planet with its radio signals and primitive satellites. They expected to find another young species, struggling to take its first steps into the cosmos. What they found terrified them. They had never seen a species with so many weapons. They had never seen a planet with so many armies, so many bombs, so many ways to kill. Earth's nations stood on the edge of another great war, their nuclear arsenals pointed at each other, ready to turn the whole world to ash. They reported back to the Council. They called humanity the Mad Ones and recommended staying far away from them. But humanity did something unexpected. When they realized they were being watched, they stopped. The great powers laid down their weapons. The armies stood down. The nuclear missiles were taken apart and stored away. In the span of a single generation, humanity transformed itself from a species on the edge of self-destruction to a peaceful civilization focused on exploration and cooperation. The Council was suspicious at first. They watched humanity closely for decades, waiting for the violence to return. But it never did. Humans built colony ships instead of warships. They trained diplomats instead of soldiers. They created art and music and medicine instead of weapons and bombs. Eventually, the Council decided that humanity had grown up. They offered membership, and humanity accepted with humble gratitude. What the Council never knew was that the change was deliberate. Humanity had looked at itself in the mirror and felt ashamed. They had seen what they could become, and they chose to be something different. The Restraint Protocol was born from that choice. It had 3 core principles. First, humanity would never start a war. No matter how much they were provoked, humans would always choose peace. Second, humanity would hide its true military capabilities. The ships they showed the galaxy were weak on purpose. The weapons they demonstrated were generations behind what they could actually build. The soldiers they trained for Council operations were taught to fight carefully, to minimize casualties on both sides, to never show what human warriors could really do. Third, and most important, humanity would never let the galaxy see its anger. The cold, calculating rage that had fueled thousands of years of human warfare. The ability to hate with perfect clarity and act on that hatred with terrible efficiency. This was humanity's greatest weapon, and they had locked it away in the deepest vaults of their collective memory. For 300 years the protocol had held. Humans had endured insults and discrimination. They had accepted unfair treatment. They had watched other species take advantage of their apparent weakness, and through it all they had kept smiling, kept hopping, kept believing that someday the galaxy would see them as equals. Thought about the message from Earth. How much longer could they maintain the protocol? It was a good question. Every year it got harder. Every insult, every slight, every act of cruelty chipped away at humanity's patience. But so far, they had held the line. She typed her response. As long as necessary, we chose this path. We will walk it to the end. 2 hours later, sat in the great chamber of the Galactic Council. The room was circular, with seats arranged in rings that rose up toward a domed ceiling. Each species had its own section, decorated in its own style. The human section was small and plain, tucked between thee and a species called the, who communicated through changing colors on their skin. At the center of the chamber was the speaker's platform, where council business was conducted. Today, an official stood there, reading from a long list of grievances. Humanity has failed to meet its quota of patrol ships for the Outer Rim, the official announced. This is the 3rd year in a row that they have fallen short. Stood to respond. The human government apologizes for this failure. Our shipyards have been focused on building medical vessels for the refugee crisis. We believed that saving lives was more important than meeting patrol quotas. The official made a sound of disgust. Typical human excuse, always claiming moral superiority while failing to meet basic responsibilities. We saved 2 million lives with those medical ships. And yet you cannot protect your own borders. Perhaps if you spent less time on charity and more time on strength, other species would respect you. Felt the familiar heat of anger rising in her chest. She pushed it down, as she had learned to do, as all humans learn to do. We believe that compassion is a form of strength, she said calmly. Laughter rippled through the chamber. They clicked their mandibles in amusement. The warriors shook their heads. Even some of the smaller, weaker species joined in. Humanity was everyone's favorite joke. The session continued for hours. One by one, different species stood to criticize humanity. Their ships were too slow. Their colonies were too spread out. Their soldiers were too soft. Their contributions to galactic science were too small. Every complaint was delivered with contempt and responded to each one with quiet dignity. Finally, they raised the matter of voting rights. They proposed reducing humanity's voice in council decisions by half. The argument was simple. Humanity didn't contribute enough to deserve a full vote. Before we proceed with this motion, another voice called out, "I would like to hear from the human ambassador." Looked up. The speaker was an ancient name. He was one of the few council members who had ever treated humans with kindness. His skin shifted through shades of blue and green as he spoke. "Ambassador said, for 300 years humanity has accepted every burden this council has placed upon you. You have never complained. You have never fought back. Tell me why. What keeps your species so patient?" Stood slowly. Every eye in the chamber turned to her. She could feel the weight of expectation, the assumption that she would give another weak, apologetic answer. "Honored," she said, "humanity is patient because we remember what we were before we were patient. We remember a time when anger ruled us, when hatred guided our hands, when we solved every problem with violence and force." The chamber grew quiet. This was not the usual human response. "We looked into the darkness within ourselves," continued, "and we made a choice. We chose to be better. We chose to believe that peace was possible, even when others treated us badly. We chose to have faith in the goodness of the galaxy, even when the galaxy showed us no goodness in return." She paused and looked around the room. Her eyes met those of the official who had mocked her, then the delegate, then the warriors. "We are patient," she said, "because we know what happens when we are not." The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the official laughed. "Pretty words from a weak species. Perhaps if your ancestors had spent more time building weapons and less time writing poetry, you would not need to make excuses for your failures." More laughter followed. The moment of tension broke, and the chamber returned to its usual rhythm of mockery and contempt. Sat down, she had said what she could say. The rest was beyond her control. The vote was held. Humanity's representation was reduced by half. From this day forward, the human voice in galactic affairs would be even smaller than before. Another defeat, another humiliation, another test of the protocol. After the session ended, walked back to her office alone. The halls seemed darker than before. The stars on the ceiling seemed cold and distant. James was waiting for her. "I heard what happened," he said. "I'm sorry." Shook her head. "Don't be sorry, this is just another day, another year, another century of patience." "How do you do it?" James asked. "How do you sit there and take their abuse without fighting back?" Looked at her young assistant. She saw the fire in his eyes, the anger that burned in every human heart. It was the same fire that had fueled humanity's darkest hours, the same fire that had nearly destroyed them. "I do it because the alternative is worse," she said. "I've studied our history, James. Real history, not the cleaned-up version. Do you know how many people died in the last war before we reached the stars?" James nodded slowly. 3 billion. 3 billion, repeated. In a single generation, because we couldn't control our anger, because we let our hatred guide us, because we became the monsters we feared. She walked to her window and looked out at the endless lights of Unity Prime. The Council treats us badly, she said. They mock us and cheat us and take advantage of our kindness, but we are still here, our people are still alive, our colonies still grow, our children still have futures. She turned back to James. If we showed them what we really are, if we unleashed the fury that sleeps in every human heart, we might win. We might make them respect us. But at what cost? How many would die? How many worlds would burn? Would we even recognize ourselves when it was over? James was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, what if they push too far? What if they do something that we can't ignore? Felt a chill run down her spine. It was a question that haunted every human diplomat, every human leader, every human who knew about the protocol. Then God help them, she said quietly, and God help us. That night stood on the observation deck of the human embassy, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, 47 human colonies circled distant suns. 12 billion human beings lived their lives, raised their families, built their futures. They had come so far from the angry, frightened species that had nearly destroyed itself. But the anger was still there. Deep down, buried under layers of civilization and self-control, the fire still burned. Every human carried it. Every human felt its heat in moments of frustration and fear. The restraint protocol was not about being weak. It was about being strong enough to choose not to fight. It was about having the power to destroy and choosing to create instead. Wondered how much longer that choice could hold. The galaxy was changing. The Council was becoming more aggressive. Species like the were growing bolder, testing boundaries, pushing limits. Somewhere in the darkness, a storm was gathering. Could feel it in her bones, in the ancient instincts that had kept her ancestors alive through ice ages and plagues and wars beyond counting. Humanity had walked the path of peace for 300 years. They had proven that they could change, that they could be better than their nature. But if the galaxy pushed too far, if someone crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, then the universe would learn a terrible truth. Humanity's gentleness was not weakness. It was a gift. And gifts could be taken back. New Helsinki was a beautiful world. It circled a yellow star very much like Earth's sun, in a system that humanity had claimed 80 years ago. The planet had vast forests of trees that looked almost like pines, wide oceans of deep blue water, and mountains that touched the clouds. 2.3 million people called it home. Weber stood on the porch of his farmhouse and watched the sun rise over the eastern hills. He was 62 years old, with gray hair and strong hands that had worked this land for 30 years. His wife Anna stood beside him, holding a cup of coffee and smiling at the morning light. "Another beautiful day," she said. Nodded. "Best planet in the galaxy if you ask me." They were still asleep inside. The twins had arrived yesterday for their summer visit. They were 7 years old, full of energy and curiosity, had planned to take them fishing in the lake today. Anna was going to teach them how to bake bread, using a recipe that had been in her family for 200 years. It was going to be a perfect day. In orbit above New Helsinki, a small defense station called Watchtower 7 monitored space traffic. Commander Lisa Park sat at her console, drinking her third cup of coffee and reviewing the night's logs. Everything was quiet, as it always was. New Helsinki was far from any conflict zones, far from any disputes. It was the kind of posting that officers took when they wanted a peaceful career. At exactly 6:47 local time, Lisa's console lit up with warnings. "What the hell?" she muttered, leaning forward. Dozens of contacts were appearing at the edge of the system. Then hundreds. Then thousands. Ships were dropping out of faster-than-light travel in waves, filling the space between New Helsinki and its outer planets. Lisa's blood went cold when she saw the ship's signatures. The most powerful military force in the galaxy, and they were here in numbers that made no sense for anything except one purpose. She slammed her hand on the emergency broadcast button. All stations, this is Watchtower 7. We have hostile contacts, repeat, hostile contacts. Fleet inbound to New Helsinki. This is not a drill. All civilians proceed to shelters immediately. All defense personnel report to stations. On the planet below, sirens began to wail. Heard the sound and felt his heart stop. That was the emergency signal. He had heard it tested once a year, every year, but never like this. Never for real. Anna dropped her coffee cup. It shattered on the wooden porch. "The children," she whispered. They ran inside and woken. The twins were confused, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Picked up and Anna took. Together, they hurried to the shelter beneath their house. All across New Helsinki, similar scenes played out. Families ran for safety. Parents held their children close. Everyone hoped that this was a mistake, a misunderstanding, something that could be fixed with words instead of weapons. In orbit, Commander Lisa Park watched the fleet approach. It was massive beyond anything she had ever seen. 3,000 warships, arranged in perfect attack formation. At the center flew the flagship of Admiral Ox, the most decorated military commander in history. Lisa tried to send messages. She transmitted on every frequency, begging for communication, asking what humanity had done wrong, offering to negotiate. They did not respond. When the fleet reached weapons range, they opened fire. Watchtower 7 lasted exactly 14 seconds. Lisa Park died at her console, still trying to send a final warning to the planet below. The bombardment began at 7:15 local time. Felt the ground shake. Even in the shelter beneath his house, he could hear the thunder of impacts above. The lights flickered and went out. Emergency power kicked in, casting everything in dim red light. And were crying. Anna held them close, whispering words of comfort that she did not believe. Stood at the shelter door, as if his body could somehow protect his family from what was happening above. The bombardment did not stop. Hours passed, the shaking continued, dust fell from the ceiling, the shelter walls cracked, could smell smoke even through the sealed doors. He tried to check the surface sensors, but they had all gone dark. He held Anna's hand and waited. On Unity Prime, Ambassador was in the middle of a routine meeting when her assistant burst through the door. James' face was pale, his hands shaking. "Ambassador," he said, "you need to see this." He activated the wall screen. The image that appeared made feel like the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. New Helsinki was burning. The Council's observation drones had captured the whole thing. The fleet in formation, the systematic bombardment, the fires that spread across continents, the cities that had become craters. Watched in silence as 6 hours of destruction played out in compressed time. She watched forests burn. She watched oceans boil. She watched 2 million years of human dreams turn to ash. "Why?" she whispered. The answer came soon enough. A message from Admiral Ox, broadcast to the entire galaxy. "Human merchants have refused to pay tribute to the dominion of," the Admiral announced. His scaled face filled the screen, yellow eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "This is unacceptable. New Helsinki serves as a reminder to humanity and to all species. The Dominion will not tolerate disrespect. We will not accept defiance. We will punish those who forget their place in the galactic order." The message ended. The screen went dark. Stood in the silence of her office, feeling something change inside her. For 15 years she had kept her anger locked away. For 15 years she had smiled at insults and accepted humiliation. For 15 years she had believed in the protocol. But this was different. This was children. This was families. This was 2 million innocent people who had done nothing wrong except live on a world that powerful aliens decided to destroy. James was speaking to her, but she could not hear the words. All she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat, pounding in her ears like a war drum. The council convened an emergency session, walked through the halls in a daze, barely aware of the other delegates around her. When she entered the great chamber, she saw that many species had already gathered. They watched her with curiosity, waiting to see how the weak humans would respond to this tragedy. The section was full. Admiral Ox himself sat in the front row, wearing his ceremonial armor. He looked at with cold amusement. The speaker called the session to order. "We are here to discuss the recent military action by the Dominion against the human colony of New Helsinki," the speaker announced. "The Dominion has claimed this was a lawful enforcement action under galactic trade law. We will now hear from both parties." A diplomat stood. "The humans refused to pay tribute that was owed to the Dominion. Under our laws, this refusal is punishable by military response. We exercised our legal right to collect payment through force." Several species nodded in agreement. In the galactic community, the strong made the rules. Humanity had always been too weak to object. The speaker turned to, "Does the human ambassador wish to respond?" Stood slowly. Her legs felt unsteady. Her hands were trembling, but her voice when she spoke was perfectly calm. 2.3 million people lived on New Helsinki, she said. Farmers, teachers, scientists, artists, children. She paused and looked around the chamber. And Weber, age 7, twins. They were visiting their grandparents for the summer. They wanted to go fishing and learn to bake bread. They are dead now. The chamber was silent. Age 4, she had just started school. She loved drawing pictures of stars. She is dead now. His voice remained steady, but her eyes were burning. Thomas and, ages 72 and 70. They had been married for 50 years. They planned to renew their vows on their anniversary next month. They are dead now. She continued listing names. Dozens of them. Hundreds. She had memorized as many as she could in the hours since the attack. Each name was a person. Each name was a life ended too soon. The chamber grew uncomfortable. This was not how humans usually behaved. They were supposed to apologize and accept punishment. They were not supposed to make others feel guilty. Finally, Admiral Ox stood. Enough of this emotional display. The humans broke the law. They were punished. This is the way of the galaxy. Turn to face him. What law did Weber break? What crime did 4-year-old commit? What tribute did Thomas owe you? They were humans, Ox said simply. Humans who lived on a world that the Dominion, the collective punishment is appropriate. Collective punishment, repeated, for the crime of existing. For the crime of disrespecting their betters. Felt the last thread of her self-control snap. For 300 years, she said, her voice suddenly hard, humanity has accepted your insults. We have smiled when you mocked us. We have agreed when you cheated us. We have bowed when you threatened us. She took a step toward the section. We did this because we believed in peace. We believed that if we were patient enough, kind enough, understanding enough, you would eventually see us as equals. We believed that the galaxy was better than its worst impulses. Another step. New Helsinki had children. It had schools. It had families who trusted that peace meant something. They believed that if they lived quiet lives and harmed no one, they would be safe. She stood now at the edge of the section, looking up at Admiral Ox. You just proved them wrong. She removed her diplomatic sash, the symbol of her office, and let it fall to the floor. You just taught humanity a lesson we spent 300 years trying to forget. You reminded us what kind of galaxy this really is. You showed us that mercy is weakness and kindness is stupidity, and peace is just another word for surrender. The chamber was dead silent. Congratulations, Admiral. You wanted to teach humans their place. You have taught us something far more dangerous." She turned and walked back toward the human section, but stopped in the center of the floor. "You have taught us that peace was a lie, that hope was a fantasy, that the only language this galaxy understands is violence." She looked at the assembled species, all the delegates who had mocked humanity for centuries. "We didn't want to believe that. We wanted so badly for it not to be true. We held ourselves back year after year because we believed that there had to be a better way." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper, but in the silence of the chamber, every word was perfectly clear. "There isn't." She walked to her seat and sat down. Her human colleagues sat in stunned silence around her. Admiral Ox laughed. "Pretty words from a weak species. What are you going to do, human? Send us an angry letter? File a complaint with the council? You have no power, you have no strength. You are nothing." Looked at him with empty eyes. "You're right," she said. "The humans you know are nothing. The patient, peaceful humans who smiled at your insults and accepted your cruelty. Those humans are dead now. They died with New Helsinki." She paused. "You won't like what comes next." The session dissolved into chaos. Species shouted at each other. They demanded that be removed from her position. Other delegates called for calm, for negotiation, for reason. But was no longer listening. She walked out of the chamber and made her way to the human embassy. Her staff followed in silence, not knowing what to say. When they reached her office, she closed the door behind her and sat down at her console. Her hands were steady now. Her mind was clear. The tears would come later in private, but for now there was work to do. She accessed a communication system that very few people knew existed. It connected directly to Earth, to a room buried deep beneath the old United Nations building in Geneva. A room that had been built 300 years ago and never used. A face appeared on her screen. It was an old man with white hair and sad eyes. He wore a simple gray uniform with no decorations. "Ambassador," he said, "I've been watching the council feed. I know what happened." Director said, "I need to speak to the president and the Council of Remembrance." The old man nodded slowly. "They're already assembling. We've been waiting for this call for 300 years. We hoped it would never come." "So did I." "Are you sure there's no other way, once we go down this path?" "They killed 2 million people to make a point," said. "Children, Director. They killed children to teach us a lesson." The old man closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were filled with an ancient sadness. "Then may God have mercy on them," he said, "because we won't." The connection ended. Sat in the darkness of her office, thinking about what was to come. She thought about the faces of the other delegates when she had spoken. She thought about Admiral Ox's arrogant laughter. She thought about Weber, who would never go fishing again. For 300 years, humanity had chosen to be peaceful. They had locked away their anger, their hatred, their terrible gift for destruction. They had built a civilization based on hope and cooperation, and the belief that intelligent beings could be better than their worst impulses. They had just proven that belief wrong. And now humanity would prove something else. They would prove that their kindness had never been weakness. They would prove that their patience had never been cowardice. They would prove that the gentle humans, the peaceful humans, the humans who smiled at insults and accepted humiliation, were not the only kind of humans that existed. There was another kind, an older kind, a kind that the galaxy had never seen. And the galaxy was about to meet them. Deep beneath the city of Geneva, in a vault that had been sealed for 300 years, lights flickered to life for the first time in living memory. Dust hung in the air as ancient systems hummed awake. Security doors that had never been opened began to unlock, one after another, following a sequence that only 12 people in the entire human government knew. President Sarah Martinez stood at the entrance, watching the last door slide open. Behind her stood the Council of Remembrance, 7 men and women who carried the heaviest burden in human civilization. They were the keepers of humanity's darkest secrets, the guardians of memories that most humans had tried to forget. 300 years, said Director, the oldest member of the council. My grandmother helped seal this vault. She told me she hoped no one would ever need to open it again. We all hoped that, President Martinez said. Hope wasn't enough. They walked into the vault together. The space was enormous, stretching for kilometers in every direction. Row after row of storage containers lined the walls, each one marked with codes that told a story of violence and destruction. The Prometheus Archives, named after the Titan who brought fire to humanity and was punished for it forever. This was where humanity had hidden everything it wanted to forget. President Martinez stopped at the first container. She placed her hand on the scanner, and the lid hissed open. Inside, preserved in perfect condition, were the original blueprints for weapons that had never been built. Weapons designed by scientists who understood that humanity's survival might one day depend on its ability to destroy. When we joined the council, she said quietly, we made a choice. We decided to be better than our past. We showed the galaxy only peaceful ships, weak weapons, gentle soldiers. We let them think we were harmless. She moved to another container. But we never forgot what we were capable of. We stored it all here just in case someone pushed too far, just in case peace became impossible. Director opened another container. This one held data crystals, thousands of them, each containing military strategies that had been developed and then hidden away. They think they understand war, he said. They've been fighting for 10,000 years. They think that makes them experts. He picked up one of the crystals. Humans have only been fighting for 6,000 years, but we did it differently. We didn't fight for honor or territory or resources. We fought because we hated each other, because we wanted our enemies not just defeated, but destroyed. We perfected the art of total war while the rest of the galaxy was still learning to point sticks at each other. President Martinez nodded. Send the activation code. Across human space, a single message went out on channels that officially did not exist. It reached every human colony, every human ship, every human outpost. It was just 2 words, but those words changed everything. Prometheus, unbreakable. On Luna, in shipyards that had produced nothing but civilian vessels for 3 centuries, alarms began to sound. Workers who had never seen anything but cargo haulers and passenger liners watched in amazement as new blueprints appeared on their screens. Foreman David stared at the designs and felt his blood run cold. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. His supervisor, a woman named Wei who had worked the yards for 40 years, looked at the blueprints with eyes that held both fear and recognition. "These are the real ships," she said, "the ones we were never supposed to build." The designs showed vessels that looked nothing like the graceful, efficient ships the galaxy knew. These were brutal machines, all sharp angles and heavy armor. They had guns mounted on every surface. They had engines powerful enough to ram through enemy formations. They had hulls thick enough to take hits that would destroy any other ship in the galaxy. "This can't be right," David said. "These things, they're monsters." "Yes," Wei agreed, "that's the point." Similar scenes played out across human space. On Mars, factories that had produced medical equipment for generations began retooling for weapons production. On Titan, laboratories that had focused on exploration technology started working on shield systems and targeting computers. On Earth itself, military academies that had taught only defensive tactics pulled old textbooks out of storage and began teaching a very different kind of warfare. General James Washington stood in the Pentagon's deepest briefing room, looking at a holographic display of the Dominion. He was 70 years old, a career soldier who had spent his entire life training for a war he hoped would never come. The Dominion has 3,000 ships in their primary fleet, he said to the officers assembled before him. 14 fortress worlds, 120 billion citizens. They've won every war they've ever fought. He pressed a button and the display changed. This is what we're going to build in the next 6 months. The officers stared at the numbers in disbelief. The production quotas were impossible. The ship designs were unlike anything they had ever seen. The troop requirements were astronomical. "Sir," one colonel said, "this can't be done. We don't have the resources, the personnel, the—" "We have everything we need," General Washington interrupted. "We just haven't been using it." He pulled up another display. This one showed the actual capacity of human industry, not the reduced numbers that had been reported to the Galactic Council. "For 300 years, we've operated at 20% of our true capability. We've hidden our factories, disguised our shipyards, pretended to be weaker than we are. We did this because we wanted peace." He turned to face his officers. "Peace is over. They made sure of that when they burned New Helsinki. Now we're going to show the galaxy what humanity looks like when we're not holding back." The transformation began immediately. In the Sol system alone, 200 hidden shipyards came online. They had been disguised as mining stations, research platforms, and commercial facilities. Now they revealed their true purpose, and assembly lines that had been dormant for centuries roared to life. The first new ships came off the lines within weeks. They were called Wrath-class cruisers, and they were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. While most species built their warships to be elegant and efficient, the Wrath-class was built to be terrifying. Every surface was covered in weapons. The hull was layered with armor so thick that standard energy weapons barely scratched the surface. The engines were oversized and redundant, designed to keep pushing forward even after taking catastrophic damage. And the crew quarters were minimal because the designers understood a simple truth: these ships were not meant to come back. Chief Engineer Maria Santos stood on the observation deck of Shipyard Luna 7, watching the first Wrath-class cruiser complete its final assembly. The ship was 2 kilometers long, bristling with weapons, painted in matte black that seemed to swallow the light. "She's beautiful," said the young technician beside her, "in a scary kind of way." Maria shook her head. "No, she's not beautiful at all. She's a nightmare given form. That's exactly what she's supposed to be." The technician looked confused. "But we built her. Shouldn't we be proud?" "We should be sad," Maria said. "Sad that we had to build her. Sad that we live in a galaxy where ships like this are necessary. Proud has nothing to do with it." She turned away from the window. "Make sure the weapon systems are calibrated. The fleet launches in 3 weeks." Across human space, the military began to train differently. For 300 years, human soldiers had been taught to fight carefully, to minimize casualties, to seek peaceful solutions whenever possible. Now they were being taught the old ways. Sergeant Michael Torres stood in front of his squad on a training ground in the Mojave Desert. They were young, most of them, kids who had signed up expecting to do peacekeeping missions and humanitarian operations. "Forget everything you've learned," he told them. "The rules have changed." He brought up a holographic display of anatomy. "They think they're the greatest warriors in the galaxy. They've conquered 100 species. They've never been defeated." He pointed to weak points on the diagram. "They're about to learn what it means to fight humans." The training was brutal. Soldiers who had expected desk jobs found themselves doing combat drills in toxic environments, in crushing gravity, in absolute darkness. They learned to fight without sleep, without food, without hope. They learned that the human body could be pushed far beyond what any other species thought possible. "Pain is information," Sergeant Torres told them. "Fear is motivation. Death is just another enemy, and we've been fighting enemies since before we came down from the trees." In Geneva, President Martinez met with the Council of Remembrance to review the war plans. The strategies they discussed had been developed centuries ago, then sealed away as too terrible to use. Now, they were being dusted off and updated for modern warfare. "They expect a siege," said Admiral Sarah, the head of the newly formed combined fleet. "Their fortress worlds are designed to hold out for decades. They think time is on their side." She pulled up a tactical display. "They're wrong. We're not going to besiege them. We're going to overwhelm them. We're going to hit every fortress world simultaneously, with enough force to break through before they can coordinate a response." President Martinez studied the plans. "The casualties will be enormous, on both sides." "Yes," Admiral agreed. "But this is the only way to end it quickly. A long war gives them time to adapt, time to rally allies, time to hit more of our colonies. We need to break them before they understand what they're facing." The president was quiet for a long moment. 300 years ago, my ancestors made a promise. They said humanity would never be the aggressor. They said we would only fight in defense, never in conquest." She looked at the war plans, at the lists of targets, at the projected casualty figures. "They attacked first. They murdered 2 million of our people. This is defense. This is justice." She signed the authorization. "Launch when ready." 6 months after the destruction of New Helsinki, the human fleet assembled at the edge of human space. It was the largest military force humanity had ever created. 15,000 warships, arranged in battle formations that had been developed through centuries of human warfare. Admiral stood on the bridge of her flagship, the HNS Remembrance. It was a new class of vessel, called a Vengeance-class dreadnought. At 5 kilometers long, it was the largest warship ever built by any species in the galaxy. "All ships report ready, Admiral," her tactical officer announced. Looked at the fleet around her. Wrath-class cruisers, Fury-class destroyers, Nightmare-class carriers loaded with thousands of strike craft, and at the center, a dozen Vengeance-class dreadnoughts, each one capable of destroying a small moon. "The galaxy thinks they know us," she said quietly. "They think we're the gentle humans, the patient humans, the humans who smile at insults and accept humiliation." She turned to her crew. "Today they meet the other humans, the ones we try to forget, the ones we hoped we would never need to be again." She took a deep breath. "All ships, this is Admiral. 300 years ago, humanity made a choice. We chose peace. We chose to hide our true nature. We chose to believe that kindness was stronger than cruelty." Her voice hardened. 6 months ago, they proved us wrong. They murdered 2 million of our people, including children. They did it to teach us our place, to remind us that we were weak." She looked out at the stars. "Today, we teach them something in return. Today, we remind them what humanity was before we chose to be peaceful. Today, we show them the fire that burned in our hearts long before we reached the stars." She raised her hand. "For New Helsinki, for the children who will never grow up, for the families who will never come home." Her hand fell. "All ships engage faster than light drives. Target the Dominion." 15,000 ships disappeared in flashes of light, leaving empty space behind them. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity had been hiding for 300 years. And the lesson would be written in fire and blood. The first fortress world fell in 19 hours. Commander OK stood on the bridge of the orbital defense station above, watching his sensors in disbelief. The humans had arrived an hour ago, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in a formation that should have been impossible. Their ships were everywhere, filling the space around the planet like a swarm of angry insects. "How many ships?" he demanded. His sensor officer's voice trembled. "Over 2,000, Commander. We're still counting." "That's impossible. Human space doesn't have 2,000 military ships." But the evidence was there on his screens. Wave after wave of vessels, each one armed far beyond anything they had expected. The humans weren't supposed to have weapons like this. They weren't supposed to have ships like this. They were the weak ones, the gentle ones, the species that accepted insults and bowed to their betters. All defense platforms, open fire, OK ordered. Show these humans what happens when they challenge the Dominion. The orbital defenses unleashed everything they had. Energy beams that could cut through mountains, missiles that could crack continents, weapons that had held off attackers for thousands of years. The human ships absorbed the bombardment and kept coming. Direct hits confirmed, the weapons officer reported. No effect. Their armor is, Commander, I've never seen armor like this. OK watched the human fleet advance through his fire like it wasn't even there. Ships that should have been destroyed simply shrugged off the damage and continued their approach. A few were damaged enough to fall back, but hundreds more took their place. Target their engines, he ordered. Their weapons find a weakness. We're trying, Commander. They don't seem to have any weaknesses. The first human ship reached weapons range. It was a massive vessel, painted in black that seemed to swallow the light. Along its hull, OK could see words written in the human language. His translator struggled with the meaning, then provided an answer that made no sense. Remember New Helsinki. The black ship opened fire. OK had never seen weapons like these. They weren't elegant or precise. They were brutal, overwhelming, designed not just to destroy but to obliterate. His defense platform's shields failed in seconds. The hull began to buckle. Warning alarms screamed throughout the station. All hands abandon, he started to say. He never finished the sentence. Across the Dominion, similar scenes played out simultaneously. Humanity had divided its fleet into 14 strike forces, one for each fortress world. They attacked at the same moment, using a level of coordination that should have been impossible across such vast distances. The military doctrine assumed that attackers would come one at a time, that each fortress world could hold out until reinforcements arrived from the others. But there were no reinforcements coming. Every fortress was under attack. Every fleet was fighting for its own survival. On the planet Iran, the third largest fortress world, General stood in his command bunker and tried to make sense of the reports flooding in. The orbital stations are gone, his aide reported. All of them, in less than 2 hours. That's not possible, said. Those stations have held against they've never fallen. They fell to the humans, General. Pulled up the sensor data. He saw the human ships descending through his planet's atmosphere, ignoring the ground-based defenses that should have torn them apart. Their assault craft were deploying troops directly into his defensive positions, bypassing the killing fields that had stopped every previous invasion. The humans fight differently than we expected, his tactical officer said. They're not following standard military doctrine. They're not trying to minimize casualties or preserve their forces. They're just pushing through, taking losses and pushing through. That's insane, said. No species fights that way. The humans do, General, and they're winning. The ground battle for Iran lasted 3 days. Human soldiers fought in ways that horrified the defenders. They didn't stop to rest. They didn't pause to tend their wounded. They just kept coming, wave after wave, an endless tide of determined faces and relentless weapons. Private First Class crawled through the mud of a trench, her rifle clutched in hands that hadn't stopped shaking since the landing. She was 22 years old, a farm girl from New Arizona who had joined the military to pay for college. She had expected to spend her service filing paperwork and running supply convoys. Instead, she was here, on an alien world fighting aliens who had killed millions of her people. A warrior appeared above her, its scaled face twisted with rage. It raised its weapon, ready to fire. Moved faster than thought. Her training took over, the brutal conditioning that had transformed her from a frightened recruit into something else entirely. She fired 3 shots, center mass, and the warrior fell. "Keep moving," her sergeant shouted. "Don't stop, don't think, just fight." Kept moving. Around her, other soldiers did the same. They were all terrified, all exhausted, all pushed far beyond what they thought they could endure. But they kept fighting because that's what humans did. Somewhere in the back of her mind understood something important. They were stronger than humans, faster, tougher. In a fair fight one-on-one, a warrior would win every time. But humans didn't fight fair. They fought smart. They fought dirty. They fought with a desperation born of 6,000 years of killing each other, of learning every trick and tactic that worked against intelligent opponents. They had never faced anything like this. They had conquered 100 species, but those species had fought with honor, with rules, with expectations of how war should be conducted. Humans had no such expectations. Humans just wanted to win. On the 5th day of the war, Admiral's fleet reached the Prime was a massive planet, twice the size of Earth, orbiting a red giant star. It was the heart of the Dominion, home to 60 billion souls, protected by the most powerful defenses in the galaxy. Admiral Ox himself waited there with the remainder of the Dominion fleet, ready to make a final stand. Admiral Ox transmitted, "You have fought well. Your species has proven more capable than we expected, but this is as far as you go. Prime has never fallen. It will not fall today." Looked at the defensive array on her sensors. It was indeed impressive. Thousands of weapons platforms, dozens of capital ships, ground-based batteries powerful enough to destroy moons. Any other species would have looked at those defenses and turned back. "Admiral Ox," she replied, 11 days ago your people murdered 2 million of mine. Children, Ox, you killed children." "They were humans," Ox said, as if that explained everything. "Inferior beings who the Dominion." "I want you to remember that answer," said. "Remember it well. Because when this is over, when your fleet is burning and your defenses are rubble, I want you to understand exactly why it happened." She cut the transmission. "All ships," she announced to her fleet, "attack pattern Omega. No mercy, no quarter. Make them remember New Helsinki." The Battle of Prime lasted 6 days. The Dominion threw everything they had at the human fleet. They fought with the desperation of beings who knew they were fighting for survival. They inflicted terrible casualties, destroying hundreds of human ships and killing tens of thousands of human soldiers. It wasn't enough. The humans kept coming. When ships were destroyed, other ships took their place. When soldiers fell, more soldiers stepped forward. The human fleet moved through the defenses like a blade through flesh, cutting deeper with every hour. On the 4th day, the orbital stations fell. On the 5th day, the ground defenses crumbled. On the 6th day, Admiral Ox's flagship exploded under the combined fire of 7 Vengeance-class dreadnoughts. Admiral watched the explosion from her bridge, feeling nothing but emptiness. "The Dominion High Command is requesting terms of surrender," her communications officer reported. "Tell them we accept unconditional surrender only. No negotiations, no conditions." "Admiral, they're asking to speak with you directly." Considered refusing. Then she remembered why she was here and she nodded. The face that appeared on her screen was old and tired. It was the Dominion's civilian leader, a being called Heron who had ruled for 200 years. He looked broken, his scales gray with stress, his eyes dim with defeat. "Admiral," he said, "I offer the unconditional surrender of the Dominion. Our fleets are destroyed. Our fortress worlds have fallen. We have no more strength to resist." Looked at him for a long moment. 14 fortress worlds, she said. 3,000 warships. The most powerful military force in the galaxy, destroyed in 11 days. Heron bowed his head. "We underestimated you. We thought you were weak. We thought your kindness was cowardice. We were wrong." "Yes, you were." Stood and walked closer to the screen. "I want you to understand something, Heron. We didn't want this war. We spent 300 years trying to avoid it. We swallowed your insults and accepted your abuse because we believed peace was possible, because we hoped the galaxy could be better than its worst impulses." Her voice hardened. "New Helsinki proved us wrong. You killed 2 million innocent people, including children, to teach us our place. You thought we would accept it like we accepted everything else." She shook her head. "We showed you our gentle face for 3 centuries. Now you've seen our other face. Remember it. Remember what happens when you push humanity too far." "I will remember," Heron said quietly. "All of my people will remember." "Make sure they do. Because if you ever threaten humanity again, if you ever harm our people again, we will come back. And next time we won't stop at your—" The transmission ended. 3 days later, Admiral stood in the Great Hall of Prime. It was a massive chamber, built to showcase the power and glory of the Dominion. Now it was filled with human soldiers, and the ancient banners of conquest hung in tatters. Heron knelt before her, offering the ceremonial sword of his office. "I surrender the dominion of," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Our fleets, our worlds, our people, all are at your mercy." Took the sword. It was heavy in her hands, a physical reminder of everything they had accomplished and everything they had lost. "Stand up," she said. Heron rose slowly, confusion on his ancient face. "We didn't come here for conquest," said. "We didn't come here to rule you or enslave you. We came here because you killed our people and we couldn't let that stand." She handed the sword back to Heron. "Keep your world, keep your government, keep your culture. But remember what happened here. Remember that humanity asked for nothing but peace and you answered with murder. Remember that we had the power to destroy you and we chose mercy instead." Heron stared at her, unable to comprehend what he was hearing. "You're letting us go." "We're letting you live," corrected. "There's a difference. The Dominion as a military power is finished. Your fortress worlds will be demilitarized. Your fleet will be reduced to defensive forces only. But your people will survive. Your civilization will continue." She turned to address the assembled officials. "This is not conquest. This is consequence. You started a war you couldn't win and now you pay the price. But the price is not your existence, it's your pride." She paused. "Consider that a gift. Consider it proof that humanity is not like you. We don't kill entire species for defiance. We don't murder civilians to make a point. We are better than that." Her voice dropped. "Even when we wish we weren't." Admiral walked out of the great hall, leaving the stunned behind her. Her soldiers fell in around her, silent and exhausted. They had won the greatest victory in human history, and none of them felt like celebrating. Outside, the red sun of Prime was setting over a city that had never known defeat until now. The streets were filled with civilians, watching the human soldiers with fear and confusion. They had expected massacre, enslavement, the brutal revenge that any other species would have taken. Instead, the humans just walked past them, heading back to their ships. A young child stepped forward, drawn by curiosity despite her mother's warning grasp. She looked up at Admiral with wide, golden eyes. "Are you going to kill us?" she asked. Knelt down to meet the child's gaze. "No," she said gently, "we're going home." "But we hurt your people. My teacher said we hurt your people very badly." "Yes, you did." "Then why aren't you hurting us back?" Thought about the question for a long moment. She thought about New Helsinki, about the 2 million dead, about the children who would never grow up. She thought about the rage that had burned in her heart for months, the fury that had driven the human fleet across the galaxy. "Because hurting you won't bring our people back," she said finally. "And because we want to be better than the people who hurt us. We want to be the kind of species that stops fighting when the fighting is over." She stood up and looked at the child's mother. "Teach her well. Teach her that war has consequences, but that mercy is possible. Teach her that humanity was kind once and hopes to be kind again. She walked away, leaving the family behind. The war was over. Humanity had won. But Admiral knew that the hardest part was still to come. Now they had to figure out how to be peaceful again, how to lock away the anger and the hatred and the terrible skills they had rediscovered. How to become, once again, the gentle humans that the galaxy had known for 300 years. She wasn't sure they could do it. But she knew they had to try. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so quiet. Ambassador walked through the entrance, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Every eye in the room followed her. Dozens of species who had spent 3 centuries looking down on humanity, treating them as the galaxy's punching bag. None of them were laughing now. Took her seat in the human section. It was the same small, plain section that had been assigned to humanity 300 years ago. The same corner seat that received little natural light. The same place that had always told humanity exactly where they stood in the galactic order. But everything felt different now. The speaker called the session to order. His voice trembled slightly, something had never heard in 15 years of attending these meetings. This emergency session of the Galactic Council is convened to discuss the recent conflict between the human government and the former dominion of. We will hear from relevant parties and determine the appropriate response. A delegate stood, recognized him as one of the most vocal critics of humanity over the years. He had once proposed restricting human access to certain trade routes because their ships were too slow and their crews too careless. The Council demands an explanation, said, his voice harder than his body language suggested. Humanity has concealed military capabilities that far exceed what was reported in official records. This is a violation of Council transparency requirements. Stood slowly. Is that really what you want to discuss, Delegate? Paperwork violations. The Council has a right to know the true capabilities of its members. You're right, you do, looked around the chamber. So let me be clear. For 300 years, humanity hid its true military capabilities from this Council. We showed you weak ships, limited weapons, and soldiers trained to avoid conflict. We did this deliberately. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Why, demanded another delegate unnamed, why deceive the Council? Turned to face him. Tell me, delegate, how did this Council treat humanity when you thought we were weak? How did you treat us when you believed we couldn't fight back? Said nothing. You mocked us, continued. You cheated us in trade deals. You restricted our expansion. You reduced our voting rights. You treated us like children at best and servants at worst. She looked at. And you, delegate, you once said that humanity should be grateful to be allowed in the Council at all. That our presence was a charity extended by more advanced species. His 4 eyes blinked rapidly, but he remained silent. We hid our true nature because we knew what would happen if you saw it. You would fear us. You would try to destroy us before we became a threat. You would do what powerful species always do when they encounter something they can't control. His voice grew quiet, but in the silence of the chamber every word carried. So we pretended to be harmless. We swallowed your insults and accepted your abuse. We hoped that eventually you would see us as equals. We hoped that peace was possible. She paused. New Helsinki taught us otherwise. The chamber was completely still. 2.3 million people, said, including children, murdered by the to teach us our place, to remind us that we were weak, to show the galaxy what happens to species that forget their position in the order of things. She turned to address the entire chamber. You all watched it happen. You saw the footage. You heard the reports. And what did you do? Nothing. Some of you even suggested that we deserved it, that we should have paid the tribute we were asked to pay, that our people died because of our own stubbornness. Several delegates looked away, unable to meet her gaze. So we stopped pretending. We showed you what humanity really is, what we've always been, what we spent 300 years trying not to be." She sat down. "Now you know." The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates shouted at each other, some demanding action against humanity, others arguing for calm. The speaker tried to restore order, but no one was listening. Finally, a single voice cut through the noise. "Enough." Everyone turned. The speaker was the ancient who had once asked why humanity was so patient. His skin shifted through deep blues and purples as he rose from his seat. "I have served on this council for 200 years, said. "I have watched species rise and fall. I have seen wars begin and end. And in all that time, I have never witnessed anything like what happened in the past year." He moved slowly toward the center of the chamber. They were the most powerful military force in known space. They had never been defeated. They believed themselves invincible, and in 11 days humanity destroyed them. He turned to look at the assembled delegates. 11 days, 14 fortress worlds, 3,000 ships, a military machine that had conquered 100 species, broken in less than 2 weeks. His skin flickered with colors that his translator couldn't interpret. And then when they had won, when they could have done anything they wanted, what did humanity do? They went home. They didn't take territory. They didn't demand tribute. They didn't enslave or destroy their civilization. He turned to why? Stood again. Because we're not like them. We never wanted to be like them. We wanted peace. Real peace, not the absence of war because everyone is too afraid to fight. But you had the power to take everything. Yes, and 300 years ago we had the power to destroy ourselves. We chose not to. We chose to be better than our worst impulses. We're still making that choice. Studied her for a long moment. The humans I knew before were kind and patient. They accepted insults without complaint. They worked hard and asked for little in return. I always wondered if it was genuine or a mask. It was genuine, said. It still is. We didn't become monsters to defeat we became ourselves, all of ourselves, including the parts we've tried to leave behind. But those parts don't control us. They never have. Then why hide them at all? Thought about the question carefully. Because power changes relationships. When you think someone is weak, you treat them one way. When you know they're strong, you treat them differently. We wanted to be treated as equals, not because you feared us, but because you respected us. She looked around the chamber. We wanted friendship, not submission. We wanted cooperation, not dominion. We wanted to earn your respect through our deeds, not demand it through our weapons. And now, asked, what do you want now? Was silent for a long moment. The same thing we've always wanted. Peace, partnership, a galaxy where species work together instead of fighting each other, a future where our children can grow up without fear. She looked at the empty seats. But we've learned something. Peace isn't given. It's earned. And sometimes it has to be protected. Sometimes the only way to stop violence is to show that you can be more violent. It's not the lesson we wanted to learn, but it's the lesson you taught us. The session continued for hours. Delegates argued and debated. Some demanded that humanity be punished for their deception. Others suggested new treaties and agreements to ensure peace. A few quietly began planning how to improve their own relationships with humans. Through it all, sat in her small corner seat and waited. Finally, proposed a resolution. Humanity would be granted full and equal status in the Council. No more restrictions on their expansion. No more unfair trade deals. No more reduced voting rights. In exchange, humanity would maintain transparency about their military capabilities and commit to using force only in defense. The vote was almost unanimous. Only a handful of species voted against, mostly those who had close ties to the fallen. When the session ended, walked out of the chamber and found waiting for her. You knew, she said, didn't you, All these years you suspected what humanity really was. Skin shifted to soft greens and yellows. I suspected. Your species was too calm, too accepting. No one endures what you endured without anger. I knew the anger had to be somewhere. Why didn't you say anything? Because I hoped I was wrong. I hoped humanity had truly found a way to move beyond violence. I hoped you were the species that could show the rest of us how to be better. He was quiet for a moment. In a way, you still are. You showed us that strength and mercy can exist together. That victory doesn't require cruelty. That power can be used wisely. He reached out and touched his hand, a gesture of deep respect in culture. The galaxy will not forget what you did, both the war and the peace that followed. Humanity has taught us something important. What's that? That kindness is a choice, not a weakness, and that those who choose kindness while having the power to choose otherwise are the strongest of all. Smiled sadly. I wish we didn't have to prove it this way. So do I, Ambassador, so do I. 1 year after the fall of the Dominion, a memorial service was held on New Helsinki. The planet was still. Forests that had burned were slowly regrowing. Cities that had been destroyed were being rebuilt. The 2 million dead could never be replaced, but their memory could be honored. President Martinez stood on a platform overlooking a vast field where the capital city had once stood. Behind her, a monument rose toward the sky. It was simple, a pillar of white stone, inscribed with every name of every person who had died. 2.3 million names. We gather today to remember, she said. Not just the dead, but what they represented. They were farmers and teachers and scientists. They were artists and builders and dreamers. They were children who would never grow up, parents who would never grow old, families who would never be complete again. She paused, looking out at the crowd. Human and alien alike had come to pay their respects. Even a small delegation stood at the back, their heads bowed in shame. A year ago, humanity went to war. We unleashed a fury that we had spent 3 centuries trying to forget. We became, for a brief time, the species that our ancestors had been. Warriors, conquerors, destroyers. Her voice grew heavy with emotion. We won. We broke the Dominion and brought peace to a galaxy that had never known what true peace meant. But victory came with a cost, and I'm not talking about the ships we lost or the soldiers who died. She looked at her hands. We remembered what we were capable of. We felt the anger and the hatred that our grandparents tried so hard to lock away. We looked into the darkness within ourselves, and we used that darkness to win. She raised her head. Some say we should be proud of what we accomplished. Some say we should celebrate our strength. But I stand here today in a place where 2 million innocent people were murdered, and I feel no pride. I feel only sadness. Sadness for what we lost. Sadness for what we had to become. Sadness for a galaxy that forced us to remember our worst selves. She turned to face the monument. But I also feel hope, because after we won, we chose mercy. We chose to rebuild instead of destroy. We chose to help instead of harm. We proved that humanity's better nature is stronger than our darkness. She placed her hand on the cold white stone. This monument stands for the dead of New Helsinki, but it also stands for something else. It stands for the choice we made after their deaths, the choice to remain human in the best sense of the word, the choice to be kind, even when kindness is hard. She stepped back and faced the crowd. We will never forget what happened here. We will never forget the price of peace. And we will never forget who we really are, a species that chooses to be better, even when being worse would be easier. After the ceremony, walked through the construction sites of the new capital city. Buildings were rising from the ashes. Parks were being planted where craters had been. Children were playing in streets that had been rebuilt from rubble. She stopped at a small memorial garden. In the center stood a statue of 2 children holding hands. Their faces were serene, peaceful, unaware of the violence that had claimed their lives. "And Weber," she said quietly, "I never forgot you." She placed flowers at the base of the statue. "I hope wherever you are, you understand why we did what we did. We didn't want revenge. We wanted justice. We wanted to make sure that no other children would die the way you died." She stood there for a long moment, lost in memory. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Ambassador." She turned. A young stood behind her, wearing simple civilian clothes. His scales were pale, and his eyes held a mixture of fear and determination. "My name is Orr," he said. "I came here to apologize." Studied him. "You look too young to have been involved in the attack." "I wasn't. I was a student when it happened, but I celebrated when I heard the news. I cheered when they showed the footage. I believed that humans deserved what happened to them." His voice broke. "I was wrong, I was so wrong, and I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't bring back the dead, but I needed you to know that some of us understand now. Some of us see what we did and feel ashamed." Was quiet for a long moment. "Why did you come all this way to tell me this?" "Because someone had to. Because my people need to start making things right, even if it takes generations. Because the only way forward is to acknowledge the past." He looked at the statue of the two children. "I have a little sister. She's 7 years old, the same age as these two were. When I think about what we did, I imagine it happening to her, and I can't." He couldn't finish the sentence. Reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder. "What's your sister's name?" "Take care of her, or raise her to be better than the generation that came before. That's how you make things right, not through words but through how you live." The young nodded, tears streaming down his scaled face. "I will, I promise." He walked away, leaving alone with the memorial. She looked up at the sky, where human ships passed overhead alongside vessels from a dozen other species. The galaxy was changing. Slowly, painfully, but truly changing. Humanity had shown two faces to the universe, the gentle face of peace and the terrible face of war. Both were real, both were true, both were human. The question now was which face they would choose to show in the future. Knew the answer. They would choose kindness. They would choose cooperation. They would choose to believe that the galaxy could be better, that peace was possible, that intelligent beings could learn from their mistakes. But they would never forget that they had another choice. They would never pretend to be weak again. Because the galaxy had learned an important lesson. Humanity's gentleness was not weakness. It was a gift, freely given because humans chose to give it, and gifts could be taken back. Now everyone knew that. And the galaxy would never forget.